They were the most powerful dynasty in Europe, ruling empires that stretched across continents, commanding armies, and dictating the fate of nations. Yet behind the gilded walls of their palaces, the Habsburgs carried a secret written not in their treaties or battles, but in their very blood. Centuries of marrying within their own family had preserved their power and slowly destroyed them from the inside. By the summer of 1680, the decline could no longer be hidden. In Madrid, the Spanish court was about to witness one of the most tragic and telling chapters of royal history. The summer of 1680 had settled over Madrid like a heavy shroud. The heat was suffocating, pressing down on the city and wrapping the halls of the royal Alcázar in a still, breathless air. Inside, the scent of lavender and rose water drifted through the corridors, but it mingled with something far less pleasant. It wasn't just the heat that made courtiers subtly turn their heads or cover their noses when the young princess passed. Whispers trailed behind her. "Her Royal Highness is coming down the corridor," one lady-in-waiting murmured to another. Perfumed water was quickly sprayed into the air, but it did little to mask the truth. At just 19, Princess Margarita Teresa, daughter of King Philip IV of Spain and niece to her own mother, Mariana of Austria, carried with her an odor so strong, so offensive, that it overpowered even the most expensive fragrances in the court. Some compared it to rotting fish, others to damp mildew. No matter how often she bathed, no matter what remedies the perfumers devised, the stench always returned. It was just one symptom of a deeper affliction, the result of centuries of marriages between uncles and nieces, cousins, and other close kin. For generations, the House of Habsburg had pursued blood purity with ruthless determination, marrying within the family to preserve power and property, whatever the human cost. From across the Grand Hall, the aging court painter Don Diego Velázquez de Silva observed the princess gliding past. His eyes, seasoned by decades of service, had watched the family's slow transformation, had painted their grandeur, and with it, their decline. The Habsburg jaw, the thick lips, the hooked nose, these were features now etched into their very identity. But the new afflictions, strange physical ailments, unexplainable odor, were beyond even the best physician's reach. Velázquez recalled once overhearing the royal physician Luis Mercado call it the price of blood purity. Years earlier, Mercado had even published a treatise warning of the dangers of inbreeding. No one in power had listened. In the palace kitchens, an older cook named Maria worked at a steaming pot, crushing rosemary and thyme into a thick paste for yet another herbal remedy. "Poor girl," she muttered. "It's not her fault she was born like this." The door burst open. The High Steward, sweat on his brow, barked orders. Her Highness was about to receive the French ambassador. That ambassador, Jean-Baptiste Colbert, Marquis of Torquay, was famous for his sharp eye and sharper reports. King Louis XIV of France received every detail from him. The defects of Spain's royal family, the signs of its decline, all of it valuable leverage at the diplomatic table. A young page dared to whisper that no herb could hide the smell. He earned himself a sharp slap and a warning. "Watch your tongue. You speak of the royal blood of Spain." In her chambers, Margarita Teresa stood motionless as her ladies dressed her for the audience. Her eyes brimmed with tears, though she uttered no sound. They powdered her face, painted her lips, and adorned her with dazzling jewels. But nothing could disguise the truth reflected in the mirror. The Habsburg jaw, the sunken eyes, the pale skin tinged with illness. At the door, the chamberlain announced the ambassador's arrival. The princess steadied herself, lifted her chin, and summoned every ounce of the Habsburg pride drilled into her since childhood. "Let him in," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. Elsewhere in the palace, her 12-year-old brother Carlos, already heir to the Spanish throne, sat hunched over a book, struggling to read. His tutor, patience wearing thin, urged him to try again. Carlos's oversized tongue made speech difficult. His malformed jaw garbled even the simplest words. His legs, weakened by rickets, ached constantly. Seizures came often. He lagged far behind other boys his age. From his chair, he gazed out the window at the palace gardens, where healthy, strong children ran freely. He had never joined them and never could. His fragile body made even the smallest illness a threat to his life. Meanwhile, in the council chamber, King Philip IV sat with his ministers. Spain's treasury was strained by war with France, its colonies restless, its economy faltering. Yet the king's greatest concern was not the empire. It was the future of his bloodline. The Duke of Medina, his prime minister, pressed him to arrange a marriage for young Carlos. Philip knew, though he never spoke it aloud, that his son might never father a child. Court physicians had warned him privately of likely infertility. What princess in Europe would willingly wed a man in such a state? And yet the search for a bride would begin. Candidates from France, Austria, and Portugal would be considered. The urgency was not just about succession, it was about the dynasty's obsession with preserving the purity of its blood. And that purity, with every passing generation, was becoming the family's greatest curse. The council chamber was alive with murmurs as scribes scratched away at their parchment. Then the doors swung open and a messenger strode in, bowing low before King Philip. In his hands was a sealed letter. The king's fingers trembled as he broke the wax. His face, already pale, drained of all remaining color as his eyes scanned the page. "There's been an incident," he said, his voice unsteady. The meeting with the French ambassador halted mid-sentence. "Princess Margarita Teresa has collapsed during the reception." Gasps echoed through the hall. This was not the first time she had fainted, and everyone present understood the grim truth. Her health was as fragile as that of her brothers. Philip rose slowly. "Adjourn the meeting. I must see my daughter." His footsteps echoed down the corridors of the Alcázar, each one weighed down by a guilt he could no longer ignore. He had once married his niece, Mariana of Austria, in the old Habsburg tradition, believing it politically wise. He had never considered the cost. Now, as he saw his children suffer, bodies frail, minds clouded, futures slipping away, he carried the crushing realization that he had not just endangered his heirs, but perhaps the entire Spanish Empire. In the quiet of the royal library, a single candle flickered beside the hunched figure of the royal physician. His hands shook as he turned the pages of an ancient manuscript, searching desperately for an answer. His eyes stopped on a line from Luis Mercado's writings. The repeated union of blood too close in kin produced fragile offspring, prone to illness and disfigurement, and in the worst cases incapable of reproduction. The physician closed the book with a heavy sigh. There were no cures here, only warnings ignored for generations. Outside, storm clouds gathered over Madrid. Thunder rolled, mirroring the unrest within the palace walls. The scent of damp stone and fading lavender lingered in the corridors, a silent herald of Margarita Teresa's decline. That smell had become more than a sign of illness. It was the scent of a dynasty in decay, collapsing under the weight of its own legacy. November 1679 arrived cool and gray. At noon, the clock in the Alcázar's tower struck, joined by the solemn peal of church bells. The royal family made their way into the Cathedral of San Isidro for a wedding unlike any other. 18-year-old King Carlos II was to wed Maria Luisa of Orleans, the lively 17-year-old niece of King Louis XIV of France. She had arrived in Madrid only a week before, but whispers swirled that she had wept bitterly upon first seeing her future husband. It was hard to blame her. Even dressed in the finest clothes, powdered and perfumed, Carlos was a pitiful sight, emaciated, weak, his Habsburg jaw so pronounced he could not fully close his mouth. Two attendants supported him as he stood through the ceremony. Cardinal Porto Carrero presided, his voice struggling to maintain solemnity as the king faltered through his vows. Carlos's tongue, too large for his mouth, made his words high-pitched and nearly incomprehensible. A strained silence filled the cathedral. In the front pew, Dona Elvira de Monte Montoya leaned toward her granddaughter. "Look at his hands," she whispered. The girl glanced discreetly and saw them trembling as Carlos slid the ring onto his bride's finger. "Do you think he can have children?" the young woman murmured back. The question hung in the air, unspoken yet shared by all. The future of Spain rested on a boy who might never produce an heir. From her place at the front, Queen Mother Mariana of Austria watched with a carefully guarded expression. She had ruled in her son's stead for years and intended to remain the power behind the throne. As both a child and wife of the Habsburg tradition, she understood its logic and its cost. Her gaze toward Maria Luisa was cold. A French princess, a Bourbon pawn, a threat. At the back, Count Harac, the Austrian ambassador, made mental notes. His report to Vienna would be damning. The king can barely stand. It is doubtful he will ever consummate the marriage, let alone produce an heir. After the ceremony, the royal procession returned to the Alcázar for the wedding feast. Carlos, drained by the ordeal, retreated to his chambers before the first course. Doctors administered yet another tonic, one of countless remedies meant to strengthen a body that had never been strong. Tonight, the marriage was to be consummated, or so the court expected. In the great hall, music played and guests feasted under glittering chandeliers. Nobles, envoys, and clergy raised their cups in hollow toasts. Carlos touched little of the food before him, sipping only broth. The Duke of Medinil, his most trusted advisor, watched with concern. "See how the foreign dignitaries look at him," he muttered to the Constable of Castile, "like vultures circling a dying beast." Europe was already preparing for what came next. The death of a king without an heir, the division of Spain, a war for succession. Louis XIV of France had been laying the groundwork for years, forging alliances and plotting moves for the inevitable. As the dancing began, Maria Luisa sat beside her husband, offering polite smiles and soft words. She played her role, even as her eyes betrayed a quiet resignation. Watching from nearby, the old poet Don Francisco David leaned toward his young companion. "Look into the king's eyes," he said softly. The young man did, then nodded. "There's sadness there," he whispered, "a kind of emptiness." "It's the weight of a dying bloodline," Don Francisco replied. "No crown can shield him from that. Enough to feel the burden, perhaps, but not enough to see that the very tradition that made his house great is the one that will destroy it." Whispers spread like wildfire through the great hall. In one shadowed corner, Maria de Cardenas, a young maid to the queen, leaned toward her mother, an older noblewoman who had served in the court for decades. She murmured that the queen was anxious about the night ahead, having heard troubling things about the king's body. Her mother, casting a stern glance, warned her to keep quiet. But the rumors were indeed true. Behind closed doors, the talk was grim. Some claimed King Carlos suffered from hypogonadism. Others whispered of more severe abnormalities, malformed genitals, possible infertility. The Habsburg bloodline had been wound so tightly upon itself for so long that it was now unraveling at its core. Still, tradition marched forward. As midnight drew near, the royal couple was guided toward their nuptial chambers. This was no private affair. While the act itself would not be directly witnessed, it was orchestrated by ceremony, monitored by custom, and charged with the weight of expectation. For Carlos, too, it was the single most important act of his life, and everyone knew it. Frail and dazed, he was attended by his gentleman, who undressed him, perfumed his skin, and handed him yet another potion, this one laced with exotic spices and rumored aphrodisiacs. He drank without protest. On the other side of the palace, Maria Luisa was prepared by her ladies. Her gown was removed, her hair combed and scented, and quiet words of comfort were offered along with discreet instructions for the night ahead. The Duchess of Terranova leaned close, reminding her that the future of Spain rested on what would happen in the hours to come. The young queen nodded nervously. As a French princess, she had been raised to understand the duties of a royal marriage, but nothing had prepared her for this, nor for the man who now bore the crown. In a nearby chapel, monks prayed fervently. Father Mateo de Moya, the king's confessor, whispered for God to grant the king's strength and courage. He knew the depth of Carlos's fears, not only of failing as a husband, but of failing as a monarch. Even the priest, however, could not shake the thought that perhaps the king's broken body was not a trial from God, but a message in itself. Meanwhile, in his private study, Dr. Juan Bautista Juanini wrote by candlelight. Trained in the new medical thinking of France and Italy, he had tried to bring modern remedies to court, only to be met with resistance from those still bound to ancient notions of humors and spirits. In his journal, he recorded his true belief that the king's condition was structural, born from centuries of intermarriage. His conclusion, centuries ahead of its time, would one day be confirmed by genetic science. By the morning after the wedding, the court hummed with curiosity. There was no formal inspection of the nuptial sheets, but word soon spread. The marriage had not been consummated. Whispers said the king was too weak, too afraid, or simply unable. Panic stirred in political circles. With no heir in sight, thoughts turned to succession, and the fate of Spain's vast empire hung in the balance. Years passed, and the pressure only grew. Doctors arrived from foreign lands, bringing strange remedies and exotic elixirs. Bulls, bloodbaths, talismans, exorcisms, even bathing the king's loins in the blood of a freshly killed goat were all tried. Nothing worked. Carlos's condition remained the same. His seed, if he had any, could bring no life. Modern science would later reveal what superstition could not. Carlos likely suffered from multiple recessive genetic disorders. Perhaps Klinefelter syndrome, perhaps a form of androgen insensitivity, explaining his physical deformities, his developmental delays, and his infertility. In 1689, after 10 childless years, Maria Luisa died suddenly at the age of 26. Officially, it was a ruptured appendix. Others believed she had simply lost the will to live. Carlos sank into deep depression, but royal duty soon called again. Within months, he wed Mariana of Neuburg, a German princess from a famously fertile family. Yet even this union brought no children. In the gardens of El Buen Retiro, the royal botanist José Curvin Martinez tended his plants. He had long noticed that repeated crossbreeding of the same strain weakened the offspring. It was nature's resistance to inbreeding, a truth mirrored in the tragedy unfolding inside the palace walls. Carlos himself would sometimes acknowledge the cruel irony of his life. A king who could not rule, a husband who could not father, a legacy he could not preserve. "Sometimes I dream of a son," he once told his confessor. "A healthy boy to carry my name. But perhaps God does not wish it." The priest gave no answer, for the truth was harsher. It was not divine will, but human arrogance that had sealed the king's fate. By the late 1690s, desperation consumed the Spanish court. Rituals continued. Priests blamed demons. Nobles spoke of curses. But nothing could stop the inevitable. On a cold November morning in 1700, the bells of Madrid tolled. Carlos, too, was dead at 39. His body, ravaged by decades of illness, lay in the royal chapel. A rare autopsy revealed shocking findings. No blood, a heart the size of a peppercorn, rotted lungs, gangrenous intestines, a single blackened testicle, and a brain cavity filled with fluid. To the medicine of the day, it was a mystery. To the future, it was the final proof of dynastic collapse. When the king's will was read, the name announced was Philip of Anjou, grandson of Louis XIV of France. The French smiled. The Austrians scowled. The War of Spanish Succession began. But beneath the politics lay a deeper truth, one no one dared say aloud. The Spanish Habsburgs had reached their biological end. The purest blood in Europe had become its most fragile. This once great dynasty had fallen not by sword or revolution, but from within, destroyed by a genetic time bomb set centuries earlier. Today, the portraits of Carlos II hang in museums, his twisted jaw and vacant stare serving as a warning of what happens when power ignores nature. In the quiet shadows of El Escorial, where he is buried among kings, lies the last and most unfortunate of his line.